Vande Gurunam Charanarvinde.
Vande Gurunam Charanarvinde.
Darshita Swatma Sukhavabodhe.
Sandarshita Swatma Sukhavabodhe.
Nishreyase Jangari Kaimane.
Nishreyase
start by giving honor and respect to my teacher from India. His name is Sri K. Patabi Joyce, Mysore, India, and he really practiced and taught for many, many years without any exposure to most of the Western world, and then slowly, some few Westerners started coming to India, and he started teaching. So this is why Ashtanga Yoga came to the West. But the reason why I feel so fortunate to have studied with him for so many years is that he, taught a style of yoga practice that was coming directly out of the traditional spiritual tradition of India. And so it came really to the West in a kind of unfiltered form. Many of the style of practice that came into the West was modified in many ways for the Western mind. So you see a lot of yoga that came to the West that emphasize a more physical approach. Of course, many of the early yoga classes took place in the health clubs and the gyms of the Western urban culture. So you had this very strong sort of focus on the physical and therapeutic aspects of the practice. But if you go back into traditional spiritual culture of India, there is a much more strong emphasis on the spiritual or meditative aspect of the practice. So this is what my teacher, Sri K. Patabi Joyce, who is affectionately known to his students as Guruji. Guruji was very fond of saying yoga is not exercise, basically. And I think he was referring to the very strong emphasis on the physical or external aspect of the practice. And he wanted to emphasize or keep the focus going onto the more metaphysical or spiritual aspect of the practice, or meditative aspect of the practice. So I think for him, the practice was, much more strong emphasis on the working with the mind and the meditative aspect of creating certain different states of awareness, different states of mind. So if you begin to look at the practice in a more metaphysical aspect, you can see that it has very strong quality of a kind of deep meditation as opposed to physical exercise, right? A lot of people In the Western world, when they go to yoga class, they're kind of looking for a kind of physical improvement or enhancement, right? People are interested in building flexibility and strength and balance, with a very strong sort of like emphasis on both performance of increasingly advanced asana or postures, and also a very strong emphasis on the avoidance of injury, or sort of like very, very strong emphasis on avoidance of extreme discomfort or injury. So that's why I think there's so much emphasis on this sort of physical therapeutic aspect of the practice. But for Pattabhi Joy's Guruji, again, he wanted to keep bringing it back to the more, you could say the more subtle or the more profound aspects or benefits of the practice. And that is by doing intensive daily practice, I mean, naturally, of course, the body becomes modified. You naturally become more flexible, more strong. But even more than that, there's kind of a quality of focus or concentration or even mind that you begin to cultivate. When you look into the traditional roots of yoga practice, the emphasis is actually quite strongly metaphysical. The philosophy of yoga is oriented towards the cultivation of understanding about you could say the non-physical aspects of what it means to be human. Certain kinds of states of mind, certain kinds of states of being, maybe increased sensitivity to sort of the non-obvious or non-physical phenomenon of one's experience. It's difficult to talk about just because it's when you use language, you automatically begin to orient yourself towards the more tangible elements of human experience. When you talk about the cultivation of deep states of meditation, then it becomes difficult to describe this process using words or language, right? It's something that you almost have to experience for yourself. And in many ways, it's a lot like falling deeply in love, right? Falling deeply in love is such a kind of profound human experience that it's very difficult to try to communicate that experience by using words or language. It's something that you have to directly experience for yourself. So in many ways, the practice should be referred to much more strongly as a form of meditation than as a form of exercise, because the end goal is not so much physical improvement or enhancement, but the cultivation of certain states of experience, different states of awareness. Kind of, you could say, it's a more and more advanced form of self-reflection. Usually in our more ordinary activities in daily life, we are extending our attention, our mind, our senses in a kind of external direction. We're paying more attention to external conditions or external objects within our environment. And this has the effect of in fact, a kind of desensitizing the ability to feel more deeply or to tap into certain more profound or subtle states of experience. As people become more sort of deeply invested in this practice, then I think very naturally different kinds of focus, different kinds of question begin to arise. Less and less extend the attention, the mind, the physical senses in an external fashion, and actually go into much more kind of a resting state. Now, most meditative traditions in the world use a technique called breath awareness. And this is something that we do in Ashtanga yoga quite strongly, is to move our attention off of sort of external physical reality and use focus on the breath to develop a certain degree of concentration in the mind. Now, as the ability to focus single-pointedly on the breath or in this single-pointed fashion, then the mind naturally develops a certain kind of ability to focus itself in a much more sort of concentrated fashion. Now, what happens when you do this is the mind naturally begins to relax, and in fact, the senses become more relaxed. Most people don't notice it, but in our culture today, there's a kind of you could even say there's a kind of an aggressive engagement of the physical senses to extend them outwardly. And one part of the process is to focus the mind in such a way to the point where the mind and the senses actually begin to relax. So what happens when the mind and the physical senses begin to relax, then energetically they begin to kind of draw back into their natural center, right? So they actually begin to move in an internal direction. And what that does is it begins to open up a new degree or a new capacity for feeling more deeply. And feeling more deeply on a more and more subtle level. So the capacity for then feeling your own emotion, being more self-aware of certain states of awareness, certain kinds of states of mind. You could say, classically speaking, the meditative mind is one in which there is, generally speaking, less movement or activity in the mind. There's a lot less identification with the movement of thought. The structure of thought has become less of a point of focus, and as a result, there's a natural sort of deepening state of relaxation that begin to occur. So if you read a lot of the traditional yogic text, there's a lot of emphasis on the cultivation of self-awareness, the cultivation of self-understanding. That's why, as you progress in practice, yoga practice in a traditional way, then you should be, naturally speaking, just falling into these deeper and deeper states of self-reflection, where you begin to feel yourself much more distinctly, much more subtly. You begin to listen to yourself. Again, not just on a physical or mental level, but also it's a kind of emotional, you could say that there's a cultivation of a certain kind of emotional intelligence, a certain kind of awareness of the different states of being, the different states of emotion that you can engage yourself into. So, in this culture today, we're so in the habit of extending our senses, our mind in an external direction that we collectively, as a culture, as a society, we tend to have less awareness, less sensitivity to internal states of being. Right? We're very good with the manipulation of physical environments. We're really good with certain kinds of physical sciences. We're good with measurements and documentation of our external environment, but there seems to be less sort of intelligence, awareness, sensitivity of more subtler or emotional aspects or even spiritual aspects of being human. So if you look more and more critically at the practice, especially from its traditional roots, you begin to see that the goal of practice is not actually what a lot of modern yoga students think it is, right? A lot of students naturally are going to go to a class wanting to develop certain kind of physical performance or technique, certain kind of enhancements to their physical self. And this is sort of a natural point of focus in the kind of culture in which we live now. And this is why I think there's such a kind of a fascination and a hunger for the more traditional aspect of the practice, the more spiritual, the more meditative, the more subtle aspects of the practice, because people have a general sense, many people have a general sense that there's some kind of there's a kind of imbalance in our culture as it's currently manifested. People see that we've created a tremendous culture of convenience, of comfort. We have an availability to a diversity of physical environments and products that we both create or arrange through the use of our mind and, of course, through the use of our physical capabilities. But at the same time, there seems to be some kind of dysfunction in terms of people's sort of emotional and spiritual lives. So it's very a natural kind of movement towards practices like meditation or yoga or martial arts, or even something like surfing has a certain kind of spiritual element to it. Because all of these different practices, while they cultivate great physical skill in many ways, they also develop certain capacity for understanding and for focus of the mind and even of the emotional, spiritual self. This is something that I think is only growing in time. I mean, more and more people are sort of having this feeling, having this sense that there's something missing from our current society and some kind of imbalance. So I think people are beginning to look in a place that historically we've not looked very much. Like, we've always looked for solutions in our external environment, how to improve our external environment, whether it be ending hunger or developing system for sort of greater levels of physical comfort and convenience in terms of like shelter and institutions having to do with the improvement of the overall physical quality of life. But the area that's not being addressed is the sort of, you could say, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being or health of the people within our current culture. So I think that's very natural for people to go much more deeply into these kinds of practices and to begin to cultivate or to develop sort of a greater sense or understanding, and even, like you could say, there's a return to the question of the cultivation of wisdom. Like, what exactly is wisdom, and how do we develop a more sort of a more full sense of what it means to be intelligent in human life. Especially over the past maybe even 2,000-3,000 years, we've been focused mostly on kind of a more physical dimensions of human life, and so as a result, we've developed, the capacity to manipulate our physical environment. That's fantastic. The development of certain physical sciences, that is amazing. But somewhere along the way, we put a little bit too much focus maybe on the external, and we collectively as a culture, as a society, we forgot about the importance of the cultivation of certain kind of internal understanding, certain kind of internal awareness, and again, even certain kind of wisdom. So there's general recognition that there are different kinds of intelligence to cultivate. Of course, more recently we've put a lot of focus on certain kind of utilization of like the IQ test, or the development of intelligence in terms of math and the sciences, things like architecture, and these are all more sort of external kind. You could say they're kind of external kind of intelligence. But now people are beginning to understand and realize, oh, there's different kinds of intelligence. Maybe there's intelligence that's more internal, right? That is connected with a different level of understanding or awareness within oneself. For example, you could say we are realizing that there's a greater sort of need or a place for the cultivation of what you would call interpersonal intelligence, right? The ability to relate to or connect to or communicate effectively and intimately with other human beings. And what the spiritual sciences like yoga and meditation address is what you would refer to as intrapersonal intelligence. That is the cultivation of a certain kind of intelligence of one's relationship with one's self, an understanding of one's own self. Because what we've done is we put so much attention on the external that we've literally neglected or even forgotten the importance of these intelligences that are much more subtle or much more internal. So that's where I see a lot of movement, growth, potential for us collectively as human beings, is the sort of the rebalancing or the shifting of our focus away from being so dominantly oriented towards the external and the physical and the material, and also now putting more energy, more focus, more investment in the cultivation of the more internal kind of sciences, internal understanding, internal intelligence. So this is a very, very exciting time, right, for the cultivation of the potential of what's possible when we begin to actually refocus our energies and our attention, and we begin to cultivate these different levels of these more subtle, more internal forms of intelligence. I think you're going to see an improvement in an entire new set or new range of possibilities that is possible within human society, human culture during this time. I mean, it's we're only now scratching the surface, so I think it's a tremendously powerful, tremendously exciting time. And again, I think more and more people are feeling this, you could say, awakening awareness. We're beginning to see that there is tremendous value in these kind of spiritual practices like yoga and meditation, and especially from the more traditional point of view. And so I think you're just naturally going to see that kind of evolution within the practices. There's going to be a lot of people who began yoga practice primarily as a physical exercise or a way to enhance their physical selves, and they're going to be putting much more energy, much more attention into the more subtle side of the practice, which is emotional, spiritual, the cultivation of certain states of mind or certain states of awareness. So I'm very, very pleased with the direction of how our practice is evolving, how people are beginning to spend more time looking deeply within themselves and putting a lot less of their energy and time and money into just the external aspects of their lives. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Para Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurudev Namaha. Hari.